one stat, one variable on the application doesn't make or break an application. Mission Accepted, Season 3, Episode 2. How you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful. I'm excited to chat with you about your successful application to medical school after the journey that you've been on, as we'll take a look in your application. It must feel great to finally be in medical school and enjoying the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, it feels amazing. Obviously, we're working hard, so it's just grinding away day by day, but it feels so much better to actually be here now.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you look back on your application process, give us some nuts and bolts. Was this your first application cycle? How many interviews, acceptances, all that fun stuff?
So this was my first application cycle. As far as number of interviews and acceptances, I have the stats off the top of my head. I think as far as interview acceptances, I got to double digits.
Wow.
I did not keep all of the interviews because after I got accepted to certain schools, I knew that I was going to go within that selected group. So I did decline some of the interviews, and then I got accepted to a few DO schools and a couple MD schools as well. So ultimately, I accepted the one for the MD program here at Rush in Chicago.
Nice. That's awesome. So it must feel good to have that much success first time around. So we'll take a look. We'll see what was successful for you. I have some good ideas. It's interesting taking a look at your application, and students will see as we go through this. There are some things that I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. But that's the fun thing about this process is there's no one right way, right? There's a lot of what I talk about in terms of storytelling and this and that. And those aren't hard and fast rules. Those are my made up like suggestions based on the love of storytelling and what that means. So it's good to see some differences on this application and to show that ultimately it still leads to success. So I'm excited to jump in and take a look with you. All right. So as we'll take a look here, the first thing I love looking at is when did you submit your application? You were a little bit later. What caused the later application?
So just going back and forth, I think with some edits on certain aspects of, like the personal statement and wanting to get everything right. So my intent was honestly to submit it a little earlier, but it ended up being obviously a little bit later, but still on the early side.
Yeah, definitely not late by any means. But still in June, still good to go. So we submitted there. The first thing I notice here is post 9/11 GI Bill eligibility. As we see here, your former military. So that's something potentially that stands out in your application as something very interesting. No other big red flags. You didn't mark yourself as disadvantaged. So nothing too terribly exciting here at the top. I would love to know, and we'll obviously see in your application, in your personal statement, in your activities section, the military obviously is a big part of your life for a few years. How much of that came up during your interviews?
I'd say the biggest part about the military experience was just a source to pull stories from. Like you talked about, storytelling is huge. So, in the interviews, when someone asked a question, rather than just have a discrete, one or two word answer, I could pull from one of my Marine Corps experiences and turn it into a story, which I felt was more compelling.
Yeah, definitely more compelling from a human connection standpoint. So that's huge.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we get into transcript area. You have some high school dual enrollment credits. You didn't completely blow your GPA with those, which is good. Looking kind of just scanning through your GPA, obviously a really good student going through college other than this one C plus in, what was it, calculus? Calculus for the life sciences. What was it, because you weren't sure what you wanted to do as a student, as a career? What was it about the classes and doing well in the classes that you think still clicked for you?
So because of the military service, I went back to school a little old. When I was a little older, I went back at 22 years old. And while I think I would have done well if I would have gone straight out of high school, I definitely did better because of that.
Okay.
So that I did a business degree, and that's, I think, a major contributing factor to why I did well in the business degree, and then actually graduated and then went back again for the pre-med stuff. So I think just being a little older, a little more mature, having developed that discipline to actually study and take the time to do what I need to do, that really helped. For the C plus in chemistry, also, if anyone's curious, that when I was doing my business degree, I thought that I might want to pursue this route even back then.
Okay.
So I did pick up a biology major in addition to it. I ended up just following through with the business degree in the long term, just to graduate with that degree. But the reason that I got a C in that class is because we did some form of calculus or pre-calc on the business track, but we did not do any trigonometry.
Yeah.
And then when I did that calculus for life sciences class, trig was a prereq, but for some reason they waived me into it. So I went into that class without having had any trigonometry.
Oh, blame the registrar.
So, well, no, I take responsibility here, because what should have happened, I mean, they probably shouldn't have let me into it. But once I got there, I should have recognized that I wasn't prepared and just said, okay, I'll come back to this, but I'm too stubborn, I guess. And so I just tried to teach myself trig while doing the calculus, and it worked out okay for the first semester. Not great. I think I got a B, but then the second one, it was just a little overwhelming, and I ended up getting that C.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, I always talk about it, one grade, one semester. Sometimes 1 year doesn't crush an application, doesn't define your application, and doesn't prevent you from getting into medical school. So that C plus, obviously not a huge issue in the grand scheme of things. Finishing your undergrad cumulative GPA, including those 60 hours of post-bac work at 384, 391 in that post-bac work. So great job there, figuring all of that out. Obviously, as a business degree, business major, your science credits up until that point were basically non-existent. So great job. Overall, GPA 378. So from a GPA perspective, no concerns. And then we get to your MCAT score.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
So the timeline is what did it for me here. I just, based on the class offering schedule at my school, unless I wanted to take a gap year, which with me being a little older already, I really honestly just didn't want to do. So I took the MCAT without having taken biochem, the second semester of organic chem, and, some other classes that aren't necessarily, must-haves, but would have been nice, like cell bio and other classes like that.
Okay.
So if I would have waited to take it, I have no doubt that score would have been better. There wasn't a day in biochem where I was sitting there where I didn't say something like, this would have been incredibly helpful for the MCAT. So I would highly recommend that everyone take all of the classes if you can. It was just a calculated risk that I ended up taking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a hard test, and especially if you're missing some of those classes, then it makes it that much harder. Obviously, not a horrible score. 503 is above average for all students who take it, and again, you still got multiple interviews, multiple acceptances. So one stat, one variable on the application doesn't make or break an application. I can't stand this narrative on Student Doctor Network, on Reddit, that stats are the end-all be-all, and there are always going to be students that have something else in their application that schools will look at you and go, you're a great student GPA-wise, you struggled with the MCAT, but we have enough data at our school to show that you're going to do just fine based on all the other students we've accepted, and with other things in your application, military service, whatever, we want you to be part of our community, right? That conversation happens, and students think that it's just like, oh, you only got a 503, we're not going to accept you. And it's like, no, that's not how this process works. As you went through the process yourself, as you were on the interview trail, did your MCAT score come up at all?
To my recollection, it only came up in one, maybe two interviews, but I think the fact that I was able to explain that it did appear to be artificially low, at least in my opinion, because of the fact that I didn't have those classes, seemed to work out well. I think any school that ended up actually caring about that MCAT score, after that explanation, I just didn't get an interview at.
And then we get into your activities. And so before I jump in and actually look at your activities, I'm going to scroll down and cheat a little bit and ask about your hobbies. You have writing, reading, powerlifting, and BJJ on there. 4 hobbies is a lot. Talk about why you decided to put 4 hobbies in your activity section.
Those hobbies particularly contribute a lot to who I am. So the powerlifting and jujitsu in particular, I'm very big on, maintaining personal health, exercise, nutrition, sleep, all of those things. And so one of the main themes of my application and interview is that no matter what I end up doing, whatever specialty I end up in, that I do want to work in preventive care in some manner to promote healthy lifestyles. And so those two things being a big part of that mission and a big part of my life, I did want to discuss. And then the writing and reading, I did, I believe, note in the application that those 2 hobbies seem trivial at face value, but once you dive in, they've really contributed a lot to my personal growth and getting me to where I am today. So the writing, for instance, is a big one. This is a bit of this gets a knee-jerk reaction maybe out of people, because when they hear that I was in the Marine Corps and then they also hear that I like to write poetry, it's
those two usually don't go together.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a fantastic outlet for me. And, in the Marine Corps, you have a lot of hardship that you have to deal with. And the road down in medicine is very similar, right? So I wanted to portray that to basically say that I have this creative outlet that really allows me to process the harsher experiences of my life. And so I guess to sum it up, those 4 things, whether they seem trivial or not, really just contribute a lot to who I am as a person. And I wanted to convey that in the application.
Yeah. And it's interesting hearing you say it, because that's basically the takeaway that I got reading these was your goal with these activities and how you kind of framed them was to show these activities, these hobbies, these whatever in that I'm putting on my application have given me an outlet for X, Y, or Z, and then the comparison to medicine and how you're basically set up for success basically moving forward because you already have these outlets. To me, that seemed like the angle that you were going for. And again, that's where we get to, there's no one right way to do this. My general stance is your goal in this application process is not to show that you're ready to be a doctor, it's to show why you want to be a doctor, right?
Right.
And let the admissions committees figure that out or have conversations with you. But you did it differently, and it still works. There's no right or wrong here. There's just, in general, here are some things potentially to stay away from, and here's why I would recommend it. But for the most part, most things work during this process. All right, so looking at your activity section, we start off with this publication here. Little interesting story here as a way to introduce a case report, which is great. You obviously were a patient care provider in the ICU for many hours over the course of a couple years, basically working, it looks like maybe part-time, and getting an interesting story here with Brian. So in general, again, my general recommendation is the experience description, so the 700 characters up top and the 1,325 characters for the most meaningful, they should be 2 separate things. And your stance for, I think, most of them, if not all of them, were basically one giant story. And even how you wrote it, right? In continuation with Brian's story, in this one here, right, to further detail the profound impact, the story of the mother and baby continues. I can tell that you're a really great writer, and sometimes that comes back to bite students if they get way too creative. Now, I don't think you got too creative. I think you were creative. And in general, the recommendation from me is keep these separate, distinct essays. Give me a description, and then the most meaningful is why was this most meaningful? But you chose to kind of use it as a super essay, 2,025 character super essay, and it works, right? At the end of the day, it works if you're able to connect with the reader. And you, as a good writer, a good storyteller, as someone who understands the power of written word, you were able to do that, and that's why it worked. So we take a look at just in general, right? When I'm looking through activities, I'm like, okay, got some clinical experience, got some research in there. I'm interested to know why you separated out these hours just by month, since they were only kind of a month apart for the most part.
Oh, for the research. So that was more, it wasn't like I was doing it on a regular basis, because between working in the ICU and school, prepping for the MCAT, all of that, I wasn't able to really dedicate a consistent schedule to that. But whenever I had free time, if it was a weekend here and there or on break, then I would basically contact this physician to see if he needed help. And that's when I would go in and do that. So it was a little sporadic. I wasn't quite sure how to document that. So that's why I ended up doing it that way.
Got it. And again, just general recommendation, I would have just combined this from May to December and did 48 hours. Nobody's going to go, well, you weren't there for 3 weeks, and so that you shouldn't count. Like, it's not that. And I've seen issues where the information gets transmitted to the school and none of these hours show up. And I'm like, let's just put it in one. So just stupid bugs and other issues. So there would be no issue if you would have done that. Again, not right or wrong, just recommendations. This one, I do want to point out, in the writing here, you're working as a medical scribe, which obviously is great experience. Again, this is potentially the one place that I saw where maybe your creative writing potentially hurts you, because this has nothing to do about you in this opening description.
Sure.
Right. It's setting the scene. It is being very creative. It is very attention grabbing. I'm definitely invested as a reader. But with the point of the application being about you, I'm like, I want to learn more about you. But there's plenty about you everywhere else. So again, not too much bad stuff. And then one other potential thing that I saw, and this is very common for non-traditional students, is when they're writing about their prior career, they're using it, these two here, this sales engineer and this finance intern. Students often use this as, here's why I wasn't interested and here's why I want to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. You can do that, but I don't think you should. Because at the end of the day, I still want to learn about you, and I still want to learn about you in these positions. You obviously are applying to medical school, so something about being a sales engineer and a finance intern didn't work out for you. So Obviously you want to be a doctor now. And so I don't think there's necessity to prove to the person reading this, like, I just want to make sure you know that I really don't want to be a sales engineer anymore. I really don't want to be a finance intern anymore. And there's always this, talking to so many students over the years, there's this imposter syndrome that they're scared of, that the med schools are going to be like, what do you mean you weren't pre-med since the day you were conceived? That I don't believe that you want to be a doctor. And so this is typically the writing that comes from that, is like, I really want to make sure you know that I really hated that job and I'm really invested in medicine. And it just, all it does is it puts up a little barrier of like trying to learn more about you. And so that's my one recommendation here would be a potential missed opportunity to learn more about you outside of medicine versus why you didn't like these roles and why you're drawn to medicine. I wrote here, this business intern, this would have been a potential good one to use numbers. I love numbers to show impact. Probably a good place there, but overall good story there. We talked about the hobbies already. You have some great hobbies that, again, the ultimate goal of learning more about you. So you did great there. Lots of honors and awards. Being in the military, that's all you do is write for honors and awards. Strength conditioning coach, obviously a big part of your journey. It looks like potentially the start of why you want to be a doctor, looking at your personal statement. Again, more awards there, and then your military service, which was great. So lots of great experiences. You kind of check the boxes for yourself about clinical experience, and I don't think you had a specific shadowing experience on here, did you?
So interestingly, yeah, I don't think the shadowing came up there, and it didn't even come up in any interviews either. I think I was able to do that just because I had so much clinical experience. So the shadowing was relatively minimal, I think, compared to that.
Yeah. So just because I've heard from people that schools will filter if there's no shadowing listed, I always recommend just putting shadowing on there, even if it's minimal, and even if it's like, well, I have 400 million hours as a scribe, that's basically shadowing. I would still always categorize as shadowing, even if it's like 5 hours, 10 hours, or whatever that may be. Just for those schools that will filter based on shadowing or not. And then we get to personal statement, and you have a really good hook starting off. Setting the scene again from a writing perspective, you're a great writer. And so, at the end of the day, the goal is to connect with another human being through your application. And that obviously worked very well for you, right? There's the nuts and bolts, there's different styles of what I talk about and whatever else. Like, all of that doesn't matter. Like, you could do all of the storytelling possible, still be a great writing, and not connect with the reader and do a terrible job. And so you came at some of the things from a little bit of a different angle, but your writing was spot on and connected with the reviewer. And it ends up with people who want to talk to you. And so they invite you for an interview. And then you show up and you are who you are on paper, in person, and you can communicate and talk, and you're friendly and cordial and all of those fun things, and then those turn into acceptances. So all of that is ultimately what you need to do. So great personal statement, a little timeliney from a style perspective, just kind of taking the reader through everything. Not necessarily something you have to do. Again, for me, personal statement is, why do you want to be a doctor? And so you kind of had to take a little while to get there because of your non-traditional journey. So not something I think all non-trads have to do to get there. But this was kind of, Todd here, seemed like kind of the start of this medical journey for you of interacting with someone, impacting their healthcare, and going, okay, this is interesting. I think maybe I want to explore that. It could have potentially been spelled out a little bit more as to the impact that it had on you, and why you then chose to explore a career in medicine. That was the one thing looking at this. I'm like, well, I can see that you did choose to explore a career in medicine, but I'm not really sure why. What was it about these things that left such a big impact on you to go to medicine versus being a physical therapist, being a nutritionist, being a whatever, right? Being a full-time personal trainer.
Yeah, I think one of the major components there was I must have started with probably 2 or 3 extra pages that I had to cut down quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
And so I just had to trim so much fat, and I probably had to trim a bit of the meat on that one too.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what happens. Again, from a non-trad journey, you're like, how am I supposed to cram 10 years of life, 20 years of life into 5,300 characters? And it's hard. It gets hard. So you explored, you talk about the journey through those decisions post that exploration, and ultimately what led you to want to be a physician, and how you got here with a good conclusion here. And again, style-wise conclusion, I like to be a little bit more aspirational, kind of looking towards the future. But other than that, right, good story. I can see who you are through this writing. I can understand the journey that you've been on and why you want to be here. And it works. At the end of the day, it works. So we look at school list, and for the most part, your school list is good. It's shorter. You applied to how many schools here? 16 total?
Um,
Maybe.
so I don't see the DO ones on there. I
Yeah.
applied, I think it was like 29 schools
Okay.
total
With DO.
with the DO
Yep.
school. Yeah.
Awesome. What led you to apply to the schools that you applied to? How did you find schools that you wanted to apply to?
The majority of them, I wanted to stay within a certain geographic area if I could. So I'm from Indiana, so I was
Mm.
mainly applying to. I mean, we only have two schools in Indiana, so Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Tennessee. My dad lives down in Tennessee, so there, and then Kentucky because it's in between.
Yeah.
I was looking to apply to my in-state schools, and then for out-of-state schools. For the Michigan ones, I'm right by the Michigan border, and so I spend a lot of time there, and then I'd spend a lot of time in Tennessee.
Mm.
So for whichever ones are out of state public, I applied to them if I had some sort of strong tie to them, like you talk about. Otherwise, I did try to apply to out of state private schools.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, good school list, good decision making on those schools. My biggest thing is just being informed in that way, right? Too many students are applying to tons of schools without understanding those nuances of public and private and in-state, out-of-state stuff. So looking back, what do you think it was that led you to be so successful?
Watching, reading, listening to all of your content is extremely helpful. So I would definitely recommend that if someone's watching this or hearing it, they arguably are
They're already doing
well
it
on that front.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really just exploring like a deep dive into the process because it's so nuanced and multifactorial that, if you do one thing perfect, that still might not be enough. If you screw one thing up, that's not necessarily going to sink you. There's a lot of things that come into play here. It's a very complex process. And so you can really do a lot of things to set yourself up for success. Applying early, applying to enough schools. Hopefully you have a decent MCAT and GPA, or at least one is really solid if you're lacking in the other, and things like that.
Yeah. Looking at your application and looking at where you're at now, do you see a connection between everything that you did and who you are as a person and the specific school that you ended up at in terms of like, oh yeah, like I was destined to be here? Do you think it just happened to be that it was a good school that you ended up choosing?
One of the big things about Rush is that they really have a high emphasis on community. I haven't verified this with anybody, but what I think really spoke to them was my desire to help the community on the preventive healthcare side of things. So no matter what I end up doing, I want to work with the community to try to raise the tide as far as like the average health for our population. And they're big on diversity too. So I like to think that also coming from a non-traditional background probably helped me get in here as opposed to other schools as well.
Yeah. Awesome. For the student listening to this, watching this right now, what words of wisdom do you have for them?
There's so much. I don't know. Hopefully you don't mind if I plug this. I do have a YouTube channel myself, and so I've been trying to follow the footsteps and make some good content to help future students that are coming in behind me. So if anybody wants to check that out, feel free to do that. And obviously following Dr. Gray's material is a big one. I think if a student were to follow your advice just by going through these videos, they would be far and away better off than the average. As far as what I would do, just understand that it's a long journey. It's complex. Get your application in early, apply to enough schools, practice your interviewing skills. If you're not comfortable with it, reach out. I'm happy to help anybody if they want it. It's pretty busy here, but I'll do my best to respond to everybody. And, yeah.
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
So it's just my name, Josh Korzan, Korzan.
All right. Everyone can go check it out. Thanks, Josh, for coming on.
Thank you so much.